The stars above the Galactic Council's core world burned bright, as they had for thousands of years. Great silver fleets drifted between planets, carrying ambassadors, traders, and soldiers. It was a place of order, where every ship entering space was scanned, logged, and cleared. No unknown vessel had entered this deep into Council space for centuries. That was why the sudden appearance of the silent giant sent shockwaves through every system. It came without warning. No jump signature. No trace of warp travel. One moment the space outside the capital was empty, and the next, a massive black shape floated there still, silent and impossible to read. The patrol stations around the planet were the first to see it. The watch commander, a four-eyed Veran officer named Turquin, stared at his monitors, his claws tapping nervously against the console. "What is that?" one of his crew asked. Tarquin could not answer. The ship was unlike anything in the Council's vast registry. It had no wings, no visible weapons, no glowing engines. It didn't even look like it had windows. It was just a vast, jagged shape of black metal, or was it metal? Almost absorbing the light around it. Its size alone was enough to cause fear. The silent giant was bigger than the Council's dreadnoughts, perhaps even larger than a planetary carrier. Yet it moved, with no sign of propulsion. It simply floated, as if the laws of physics did not apply to it. "Send a hailing signal," Tarquin ordered. A bright pulse of communication was sent toward the ship. Seconds passed. No reply. They tried again. Still nothing. It wasn't until the third attempt that the screens flickered. A short message came through, written in a language few in the galaxy spoke, English. "Do not provoke us." No name, no demands, no threats beyond those 4 words. The message caused confusion in the Council chambers, but also laughter. Representatives from proud alien races chuckled at the idea that one ship, one lone vessel, could issue such a warning in the heart of their empire. The mighty Zelta ambassador called it a child's bluff. But the laughter did not last. Every attempt to scan the silent giant failed. Advanced sensor arrays simply returned. Nothing, as if the ship wasn't really there. Even visual cameras sometimes showed empty space where the ship should be, only for it to reappear in the next frame. Probes sent toward it vanished the moment they came close. Rumors began to spread. Some claimed the ship was built from the remains of a dead star. Others whispered it was not a ship at all, but a living creature wearing armor. A few even suggested it was not from this galaxy. The humans had been silent in galactic politics for decades. They had fought wars in their own corner of the stars, built colonies far from the great trade routes, and rarely dealt with alien powers. Many believed them weak compared to the great empires. Yet here they were, their ships standing alone against the entire Council, showing no fear. On the bridge of the silent giant, Captain Elias Rourke watched the alien fleets gather on distant scanners. His ship, the HSS Retribution, had been ordered to deliver a message not of diplomacy, but of warning. "They're scared," his first officer said quietly. "They should be," Rourke replied. "But fear can turn to arrogance, and arrogance leads to mistakes." Back in the Council chambers, debate turned into shouting. Some demanded the destruction of the human warship before it could act. Others argued that it was too dangerous to approach without knowing its capabilities. In the end, pride won. The Zelta Empire volunteered to escort the intruder away. They sent a fleet of 100 warships. Their arrival was a storm of engine trails and flashing hull lights. From orbit, it looked like a swarm of metallic predators surrounding. a lone prey animal, yet the silent giant did not move. It didn't turn its weapons, or, if it had any, they could not be seen. It simply floated there, its black hull gleaming faintly in the light of the nearby star. On the bridge of the lead Zelta battleship, Admiral Carveth gave the order to lock weapons. That was the moment everything changed. Without warning, the space around the human ship seemed to ripple. It was subtle at first, like heat waves above a desert, but within seconds, the ripple became a distortion so deep that even the stars behind it twisted and blurred. The alien targeting systems went offline. Navigation failed. Engines stalled. Panic filled the comm channels, and then silence. When the distortion faded, the Zelta fleet was gone. Not destroyed, gone. No debris, no wreckage, no escape pods. The space where they had been was empty. The Council's orbital defense stations began hailing frantically, demanding answers. But the human warship gave none. It simply remained there, watching, waiting. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council felt something it had not felt in centuries: helplessness. The disappearance of the Zelta fleet spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. From the cold mining stations of the outer rim to the glittering cities of the core worlds, everyone whispered the same question: what is the human warship? The Galactic Council tried to control the rumors. They released statements saying the Zelta fleet had simply been recalled for political reasons. But the soldiers, traders, and pirates of the galaxy were not fools. No one had seen even one Zelta ship return home. Entire families of crew members were left without answers. In the hidden corners of Council space, some began to fear the truth, others began to plot. The Dravic Dominion was the first to act. Unlike the proud and arrogant Zelta, the Dravic were cold and calculating. They did not waste time with public challenges or displays of honor. They believed in winning, without warning. If the humans had brought an unstoppable weapon into the heart of Council space, the Dominion would break it before it could be used. On the bridge of the silent giant, the HFY Retribution Captain Elias Rourke stood over a holographic map of local space. His crew spoke in quiet, tense voices. They had already guessed that another attack was coming. Multiple signatures on approach, reported Lieutenant Harris, his hands running over glowing controls. Fast movers. No transponder IDs. Rourke's lips curved into a humorless smile. The Dravic don't announce themselves. The Dravic strike force arrived in complete silence. No warning signals, no formation lights. 30 heavy warships glided through the darkness, accompanied by smaller corvette escorts. Unlike the Zelta, who had tried to intimidate with numbers, the Dravic had a strategy. They spread out, surrounding the Retribution from all angles. Some ships stayed far away, armed with long-range siege weapons. Others crept in close, carrying boarding teams ready to cut their way into the human vessel. Inside the Retribution, the crew felt the vibrations of something strange. The Dravic had released resonance mines weapons designed to disrupt a ship's shields and tear its hull apart, molecule by molecule. They're trying to shake us apart without firing a shot, Harris said. Rourke gave a single nod. Activate. The veil. From the outside, the Retribution seemed to shimmer, its solid black hull turning into a swirling distortion. The resonance mines touched the distortion and vanished, one by one, as if they had fallen into a bottomless pit. Dravic fleet hesitated, their commanders barking confused orders. That hesitation lasted only seconds. The first wave of heavy siege cannons opened fire. Blinding bolts of plasma lit the void. Each one carried enough energy to melt a small moon. They struck the distortion around the human ship and disappeared. Without sound, without light, without impact. One Dravic commander made a fatal decision, board them. 8 corvettes rushed forward, each one carrying elite Dravic shock troops. They cut through space, fired grappling hooks, and tried to latch onto the Retribution's hull. Inside the human warship, Rourke didn't give an order. He simply watched. The hull of the Retribution began to ripple slowly at first, then faster, until the very surface seemed to open like an eye. The boarding ships never touched the hull. Instead, they were pulled forward violently, as if by invisible hands. In an instant, each corvette slammed into the distortion and vanished, gone. The remaining Dravic warships broke formation, panic flooding their comm channels. They tried to retreat. They didn't make it far. The Retribution moved for the first time since arriving in Council space. It rotated with slow, deliberate precision, like a predator choosing its prey. Then, from the black void beneath its hull, a single beam of pale light emerged. It wasn't fast or explosive. It didn't even look like a weapon. It simply touched the nearest Dravic ship. The warship flickered once, and was no longer there. One by one, the human beam touched the remaining ships, and one by one, they were erased from existence. No debris, no survivors, just empty space. When the last Dravic vessel vanished, the beam retracted, and the Retribution returned to stillness. For Captain Rourke and his crew, it was just another threat dealt with. For the galaxy, it was the second impossible victory. The first had been dismissed as luck. This time, there could be no denial. The silent giant was not just a ship. It was a message, a reminder that humanity's power was far beyond what the galaxy understood. But in the shadows of distant space, other powers were watching. The defeat of the Dravic did not scare them into peace. It only made them want the Retribution more, and some of them were already planning the largest attack in history. The Retribution had now survived 2 of the galaxy's strongest military forces without so much as a scratch. To the common people of the Council worlds, it was no longer just a ship, was becoming a myth. Merchants whispered about it in soldiers spoke of it in hushed tones, afraid the ship might somehow hear them. Children drew pictures of a black shadow drifting among the stars. But myths invite curiosity and greed. In the distant and lawless Targos Nebula, a criminal syndicate called the Iron Fang met in their hidden fortress station. The Iron Fang were not soldiers, but spies, thieves, and smugglers. They had no interest in fighting the Retribution. They wanted to know what it was. If they could understand its technology, they could sell it to the highest bidder. And in a galaxy built on war that would make them richer than entire planets, their leader, a pale and scarred alien named Kravos, leaned over a hologram of the human ship. We don't attack it. We don't fire on it. We get close, and we look inside. The plan was simple but dangerous. They had an advanced stealth vessel called the Ghostrunner, a ship so well hidden it could pass as a drifting asteroid on scanners. The Ghostrunner would creep close, lock onto the Retribution's hull, and send out microscopic drones to scan every surface. For weeks, the Iron Fang prepared. Every member of the crew was told the same rule. If the humans see you, you are already dead. When the day came, the Ghostrunner emerged from the shadows of a dead moon and drifted toward the Retribution. Inside the stealth ship, the crew barely breathed. Their instruments were running at the lowest power settings to avoid detection. Slowly, the black silhouette of the human warship grew larger on their view screens. "It's bigger than I thought," one crewman whispered. "No talking." Krovos growled. They drew closer and closer until the retribution filled the entire viewport. No lights, no engines, no visible weapons, just a vast, black surface that seemed to drink in the light around it. Krovos gave the signal. The first drone detached from the Ghost Runner, a speck of metal smaller than a fingernail. It floated toward the human ship and touched its surface. The crew expected a metallic clink. Instead, the sound that came through their sensors was wrong. It was soft, like pressing a hand into thick leather. The surface of the Retribution moved. "It's alive," one of the engineers whispered, his voice shaking. Through the drone's tiny cameras, they saw the surface pulse faintly, as though something beneath it was breathing. Strange lines of light appeared and faded across the hull symbols. That looked like a language, but none the crew had ever seen before. Krovos felt his stomach twist. "Keep scanning." But before they could gather more data, the drone's camera flickered. The last thing it recorded was a sudden opening in the ship's surface, like an eye snapping wide. The feed went black. Seconds later, the Ghost Runner's lights flickered. Every system shut down. Gravity failed. The crew floated in the dark, hearing nothing but their own breathing, and then a voice that it wasn't transmitted through their comms. It was inside their heads. A deep, calm voice that spoke in perfect Targosian. "I see you." Panic erupted on the bridge. Krovos screamed for the engines. The crew scrambled to restart the systems, but every control panel was dead. The Retribution hadn't moved an inch, but its presence pressed against them like the weight of a planet. Then, as suddenly as it began, power returned. The Ghost Runner spun away at full thrust, its crew too terrified to even look back. When they finally reached the safety of the target nebula, they discovered something chilling. Every recording, every scan, every piece of data they had collected was gone. Their ship's memory banks were wiped clean and etched into the Ghost Runner's hull. In deep, burned letters were two words in English: "Go home." Word of the Iron Fang's failed mission spread quickly, though no one could explain how. The Retribution had not destroyed them, but the message was clear: it allowed them to live only because it chose to. In the Galactic Council chambers, the fear deepened. No one knew whether the human warship was a threat waiting to strike, or a guardian warning the galaxy to stay away. But far beyond the Council's reach, in the cold darkness between galaxies, something else had taken notice, something older than all the empires combined, and it was moving toward the Retribution. The galaxy could no longer ignore the Retribution. 2 fleets had been erased. A feared criminal syndicate had been humiliated, and the warship still floated in the heart of Council space, silent as the void, daring anyone to come closer. For the proud rulers of the great empires, this was an insult they could not accept. Pride demanded action. Fear demanded overwhelming. And so the decision was made. For the first time in galactic history, every major power agreed to form a single armada. The Zelta, the Dravik, the Zarth coalition, the Hesha clans, the Vari swarmpires that had been enemies for centuries, now united for one purpose: destroy the human warship. The fleet they assembled was beyond imagination. Over 10,000 warships of every size and design filled the void. Battleships with hulls the size of cities, planet crushers armed with weapons that could split moons, swarms of fighter craft like locusts in the darkness. The fleet gathered in the Orban rift, just 3 light hours from the Retribution. There, under the command of Supreme Admiral Warship, they prepared their assault. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, Vaughn addressed his captains. This is not a war. This is a cleansing. One ship cannot stand against the combined power of the galaxy. Today, we erase this insult, but far away, aboard the Retribution, Captain Elias Rourke stood calm at the center of his bridge. His crew moved with quiet precision. The ship's sensors had already detected the gathering armada. "They're coming," Lieutenant Harris said, her voice steady but tight. "Of course they are," Rourke replied. "It's the only move they have left." The attack began without warning from the Orban rift. The armada surged forward like a tidal wave of steel and fire. Weapons lit the darkness: plasma beams, antimatter torpedoes, railgun slugs the size of towers. The void itself seemed to glow as billions of tons of destructive energy screamed toward the lone human ship. Inside the Retribution, the crew sat in silence. The captain didn't give the order to fire. He didn't even tell them to raise shields, because the Retribution had no shields. The first wave of weapons hit, or at least they should have. But just before impact, the space around the human ship bent. The attacks didn't explode or bounce a wave. They simply vanished, swallowed by an invisible barrier. The second wave was stronger, coordinated from thousands of ships. It too disappeared into nothing. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vaughn slammed his fist against the console. "All ships, converge. Close range, bring every weapon to bear." The armada surged in, surrounding the Retribution from all sides. Massive ships blocked the stars, their shadows stretching across the human vessel's dark hull. Still, Rourke did not fire. Then, for the first time since entering Council space, the Retribution moved. It turned slow, deliberate until its black, jagged prow faced the heart of the alien fleet. The living surface of its hull began to shift. Symbols of light spread across it in patterns that no one in the galaxy could read. The strange glow grew brighter, spilling into the void. "Captain," Harris whispered, "it's waking up." The light on the hull exploded outward in a single, silent wave. It was not a beam, not a missile, not a blast of heat. It was something else. Where the wave touched the alien ships, reality seemed to tear. Hulls crumbled without an explosion, vanishing like smoke in the wind. Entire vessels simply stopped, existing, their place in space filled only by the cold stars beyond. Panic tore through the armada. The Vari swarm turned to flee. The Zarth coalition tried to retreat behind their planetary shields, but the wave moved faster than light itself, erasing warships as though they had never been born. In minutes, thousands were gone, and then silence. The Retribution came to a stop, floating in the middle of an empty void. All that remained of the greatest fleet in history was drifting debris, small fragments of metal, frozen bodies, and the fading echoes of terrified screams over broken COMMs. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vaughn stared in horror at the shrinking number of ships on his display. His hands shook. His voice cracked as he gave the final order. "All surviving vessels, retreat." A handful of crippled ships limped away into the darkness. None looked back. On the Retribution, Rourke closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. "Transmit the message." Across the galaxy, every communication channel, every holoscreen, every military frequency received the same signal. It was a human voice, calm and steady. "We want peace. But if you bring war, you will kneel. And then the signal ended. The retribution turned, its massive form vanishing into the depths of space, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. But in the shadows beyond known space, something else was still coming. Something even the retribution might not be ready for. The destruction of the Grand Armada shook the galaxy to its core. The Council's greatest fleets were gone. The strongest admirals had been humiliated. Entire empires were left without their main defense forces, and still, the retribution floated, silently in the depths of space. For 3 days, no one dared to approach. No one fired a weapon. No one even spoke its name on open channels. It was as if the galaxy had decided that pretending the warship didn't exist would make it less terrifying, but the truth could not be ignored. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. The chamber was tense, filled with leaders who had once sworn they would never work together. The Zelta Emperor sat silent, his eyes fixed on the table. The Dravic warlord kept his hands folded, saying nothing. The Vari Queen, who had once threatened to burn human colonies, now looked pale and small in the center of the chamber. A massive hologram flickered to life Captain Elias Rourke. He did not shout. He did not threaten. His voice was calm, steady, and heavy with meaning. Humanity does not seek war, but we will not bow to any empire. The retribution is not here to conquer. It is here to remind you, if you raise your weapons against us, you will kneel. No one interrupted him. No one dared. When the hologram faded, the chamber remained silent. Finally, one by one, the leaders of the galaxy stood not to speak, but to bow. Some out of respect, others out of fear. In that moment, humanity had achieved what no species in recorded history had done made. The galaxy kneel without firing a single political shot, but far from the safety of the Council's world, in a place where light itself struggled to exist, the retribution drifted through empty space. On its bridge, Captain Rourke stared into the dark, his face unreadable. "They've submitted," Harris said quietly. "For now," Rourke replied, "but fear fades, and when it does, they'll test us again." Harris hesitated. "And when that happens?" Rourke's gaze never left the dark void ahead. "Then they'll remember why they were afraid in the first place." That was when the ship's sensors lit up. At first, the readings made no sense. The signal wasn't coming from inside the galaxy, it was coming from beyond it. Something massive, larger than any fleet, was crossing the empty gulf between galaxies, heading straight for them. The retribution's living hull began to pulse, as if it felt the presence too. Strange symbols different from before crawled across its surface like burning veins. Captain Harris said slowly, "What could be big enough to move through the intergalactic void?" Rourke didn't answer. His eyes narrowed. Whatever. It was older than the Council, older than humanity's rise into the stars. And for the first time, the Retribution's crew felt something they had never felt before. Not fear, but anticipation. The warship turned toward the oncoming presence, engines glowing for the first time in weeks. The darkness ahead seemed to shift, as though space itself was bending under the weight of what was coming. And then, with a single burst of impossible speed, the Retribution vanished into the black dot. In the days that followed, the galaxy would tell and retell the story of the human warship that made the greatest empires kneel. Some said it was a god in the shape of a vessel. Others believed it was a weapon from another universe. But only the crew of the Retribution knew the truth. This was not the end. It was only the first warning.